Hello, I'm Christine Zips of Zips Media and founder of Safer Alternatives for Government Schools. Today, we're having a gathering of our tribe and recording this for posterity. We have a couple of wonderful speakers lined up for you. And starting off is John Klyczek. He is author of School World Order that you'll spot right here. Fabulous book. And this is the second time he has come on the Zips Media stage. So we welcome him very much. He is author of that book and a researcher, professor, a speaker, and the School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education is the entire title. But today he will discuss the dangers of ed tech data mining and state and federal homeschool subsidies. So welcome, John. Feel free to just jump in however you'd like. If you'd like to share a little bit more about your background or just get right into it, you have the stage, and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Christine. Yeah, so I've been in public education my entire life. So I'm 38 now. So whether as a student or as a teacher, I've been in public education for a very long time. And so when I wrote my book, which was prior to COVID, I was hoping to make some sort of a case for a way to reform public ed and, somehow salvage something there. And then after COVID, with the mandates and everything, I've been loth to be able to hold such a strong position. I mean, I don't want to give up on the possibility of, some public school reform down the road, but in the current situation that we're in, I think that, the best option is to get out of the public schools, especially if you have children. I don't. If I did, I wouldn't have them in there. And hopefully, by voting with our dollars, by removing the attendance money, by getting the children out of the schools, maybe that's an impetus for some of the reforms I hope for in my book. So, everybody in this audience here homeschooling their children, I commend you for the initiative and responsibility that it takes. Right, it's not an easy task. I'm sure it's probably a scary task. It requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources, and because of that, I often hear homeschoolers sort of want to lean towards using virtual or online charter schools as sort of the platform for their homeschool operation. And today I just want to sort of briefly go over some of the reasons why you want to avoid that. And you can get more detail regarding these issues in my book. So oftentimes homeschoolers might feel maybe that they don't have the qualifications to teach, right? Maybe they feel like they lack instructional materials or a thorough curriculum, or maybe they're worried about accreditation. That's something that obviously is going to be different for each state. But I think all of these can be an impetus to go with the virtual or the online charter school, except that there's two main dangers in that. Okay. And so the first one is that with federal funding comes federal control. And the second one has to do with the data mining that's necessarily involved in the virtual charter school. Okay. So this group is called Safer Alternatives to Government Schools. By entering into a contract with a charter school, you're entering into what's known as a public-private partnership. So a charter school is a private company, but it is subsidized with federal and sometimes state tax dollars. So obviously anything that the Fed or the state funds, they are allowed to audit, and they want to see that the money is meeting the standards that they would like you to uphold to. Now, traditionally, charter schools have been given a little more flexibility, a little more leeway in terms of how they might implement things like Common Core and things like that. And so this isn't to say that, if you go with the charter school that necessarily they're just going to, the Fed comes in and starts to tell you what to do. But what can happen is that sometime down the line, especially after we've sort of, packed in the students into the charter schools, and once that sort of gets its own momentum, they can withhold the funding. Okay, and so that could also be another reason why some people might want to go with the virtual at-home online charter school, is that, right, it being subsidized by the Fed or the state potentially makes it, right, more affordable than maybe just a separate private school, or creating some sort of a homeschool co-op or pod, and where you're basically having to get your own instructional materials, maybe hire private tutors or teachers in the local area in the pod community. But eventually, the door is open, right? The door is open for the federal government or state government to come in and basically say, okay, if you want to keep getting this money, right, you're going to have to start implementing some of the things that many of you probably attempting to avoid by getting your children out of the public or government school. So in other words, right, through the public-private partnership, if you sign up with the virtual online charter school at home, basically you're bringing the government into the home. Okay, so you're not really getting out of it. So that would sort of defeat the purpose, right? And another problem with this is that charter schools don't have elected school boards. Okay, so it's not a democratic process, right? They have corporate boards that basically have appointed representatives, and of course you could voice some concern or whatever your opinion is about how you think things should be changed in terms of curriculum or policy, but they have no obligation to listen to you or to accommodate. At least with a public school, right, with a public school board, you have the opportunity to vote out the board members, to vote in a new board that is going to be sympathetic to the reforms that you request. So in some ways, right, down the pipe here, especially once the federal government or the state government decides that they want to withhold that money if you don't implement whatever it might be, down at some point you might even see, if we continue on down the line with mandates, that you even have to have a mandate a vaccine just to get to be enrolled in the charter school, okay, online. And there has been schools where students were not allowed to continue learning online unless they got their vaccine, even though they were nowhere inside the building. So I mean, this is, it is a possibility. And at that point, because it's a corporate charter school with a corporate board that's not elected, right, you really have nobody to complain to. You really have no recourse to sort of to get sort of the representatives or the officials to reform the policy in the way that you desire. Okay. The second danger has to do with the data mining that's necessarily implicit in any of these online learning platforms. Okay, and there's a whole range of different types of technologies that data mine different biopsychosocial algorithms from students, and you can get a long list of them in my book in terms of the types of technologies and specific companies, the particular platforms and applications. But a nice overview would be that there's cognitive behavioral adaptive learning courseware. Then there's socio-emotional courseware. Some of it can be biofeedback wearables. And all this stuff is going to data mine your students' thinking and feeling algorithms. Maybe they have wellness checks. Google Classroom was posting wellness checks at schools. And I've written about that in some of my articles that I've posted on Activist Post. And all this data eventually goes into, basically builds a psychological profile, a truly permanent record that can be aggregated into what will eventually come down the pipe here. We're really seeing some of it already sort of emerging into the American society, and that is social credit. Okay, and so based on all these various algorithms that these platforms are going to data mine, this is going to, in the long term, determine your child, your students' access to the public square and to private commercial services based on not just how well they perform in terms of their academics, but also maybe their career pathway, which is embedded in some of the lessons, or maybe they just weren't politically correct enough, right? Maybe they weren't woke enough or something like that, and this data will follow them into their careers and into their will determine their access to other public services as well as jobs and things like that. And we should note that the virtual charter school industry entirely, it has its roots in the federal government. One of the focuses of my book was something called Project BEST, Basic Education Skills Through Technology. This was leaked by Charlotte Thompson Iserbeat. She worked for the Department of Education and the Office of Educational Research and Improvement under Ronald Reagan. And what Project BEST was basically a pilot to basically replace academics with workforce training through public-private partnerships with technology corporations that would implement Skinner box teaching machines, which are now the modern digital adaptive learning courseware, in order to basically psychologically profile students from cradle to career and then to grave as well. And the Secretary of Ed at the time was a guy by the name of T.H. Bell. And his successor was a guy named William Bennett. And Bill Bennett was the founder of the very first and what is now one of the largest and most prominent virtual charter schools in the United States, might be one of the largest in the world, and that's called K-12 Inc. And K-12 Inc., and by the way, which was also financed by Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Ed under Donald Trump. One of the most prominent board members on K-12 Inc. was Mary Hatwood Futrell. She was the president of the National Education Association. So, just historically, the virtual charter schools have come out of the exact same government/corporate public-private system that Charlotte warned about, and basically is the model for basically putting the government in your home in order to profile your children and your students. So the best resolve is going to be some sort of a homeschool co-op or a pod that does not use any virtual online charter school. Now, that's not to say we can't use any technology, but basically all you need is internet and open source instructional material, right? If you're looking for the classics, if you want your children, your students to read classic literature, most of this stuff is open source on like Gutenberg Press and stuff like that. So, you really don't even have to purchase the books. And then there's lots of sort of open source instructional materials. I've been trying to build some. I've got one so far. It's a very cursory overview of the trivium, classical method of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. But this is just to say that, to the extent that you need technology, you pretty much only need internet access so that you can look up your classics, your classical materials. If you need to have the instruction supplemented, if you feel like you're not qualified to teach certain disciplines or certain subjects or certain levels of certain disciplines or subjects, this is where the homeschool co-op or pod system can supplement those areas where you feel like you need some gaps filled. So you can, through that community of homeschoolers, right, you can find somebody in there that maybe is more of a specialist in math or language arts, or maybe some history of philosophy or some civics, whatever it might be, and you can sort of team up. And if you're all teaching each other's children's, then maybe maybe you could just basically barter, right? I'll teach English, you teach math, right? And some of the costs can be cut there, but otherwise there's ways to hire private tutors and people in those pods that can that can pick up the slack in those ways. So those are my two main sort of warnings or recommendations against the virtual online charter schooling industry, and sort of, my rough overview of sort of how you can get everything you need with a homeschool pod, in-person learning, face-to-face, using classical materials and open source resources.
Thank you, John. That was excellent. And I do want to mention that in the show notes below, you'll find links for more information, including how to order John's book and visit his website. So I just, thank you so much for the reminder about the charter schools being connected with the government in that way. I don't think that that is, I don't think they like to make that a big announcement, right? Has that been your understanding as well?
Yeah, I mean, you can see largely, with a lot of the stuff that's been going on, with sort of the conflicts between school boards and parents lately, that there's a real big revival push towards moving into what they call school choice, which is basically just a euphemism for either charter schools, vouchers, education savings accounts, tax credits, and things like that. These are all basically ways that the federal or state government subsidizes basically private educational institutions or companies. And in many ways, they're sort of two arms of the same dialectic, right? And so it's, they don't mention that because, if you move to one, you're not really outside of the system. So one way or another, you're still basically in that paradigm.
Really a good point to bring up. I'm glad you did. And I've noticed that there's been a lot of talk. I don't know if it's mostly rumor or just some whisperings or rumblings below the surface. We're not putting the National Education Association in the best light. I saw a program recently, I think Tucker Carlson brought it out on Fox News, where they were really supporting the LGBTQ business. And I thought, wow, to me, if that isn't overstepping, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Have you heard about that?
I have not, but I mean, academia is always been, they're very left of center. And so, they tend to always be very accommodative towards marginalized groups, whether they be LGBTQ and whatever comes after that. There's different acronyms that they use depending on who you're talking to. And, I don't want anybody to feel marginalized or like they don't have a right to learn or anything like that. But, especially when we're talking about, youth, I teach college. So obviously, everybody's at least 18 or older. And, at that level, I've never wanted any of my students to not feel comfortable because of their sexual orientation or anything like that.
Absolutely.
But as far as children go, well, for one, sexuality is not really an academic subject, at least not for children. And so to that extent, yeah, it's just, I don't think it really is appropriate for those grade levels. Right.
And I was pretty much, I guess, thinking that the main concern, I would believe for parents, is that there's such a push for children way too young to even understand what they would be doing if they were to, get started with puberty blockers and on the way to surgery. And this is what is just, to me, so dark and wrong. And right, not talking about orientation, that's everyone's business, but the way they're pushing it, again, it should be a private matter, I think, and I believe many parents do as well. But thank you so much. And today we have waiting in the wings is Rochelle McKim, and she is director of Summit Homeschool Academy. And she'll be coming up in our part 2 video next. But do you have any questions for John today, Rochelle?
I appreciated getting a broader understanding of the data collection in Colorado. I didn't believe that that was really happening. It was when the park test was implemented and people were making a big deal of it. And I looked at the Colorado Attorney General's website, and sure enough, Google has an office here in Boulder, and it was a total slap on the wrist, but they were found guilty of trying this out, doing the data collection by putting devices on antennas of cars and collecting it from cellular devices on people to make profiles to see if it could work. And that's illegal. So they were found guilty of it and fined like nothing, like $20,000 or something like that. And then finding out that it's the same technology that is being used in the park tests. And I did a Cora with one of my, I guess I shouldn't name names, but a woman asked me, will you do a Cora? And told me exactly what I needed to ask from CDE. And I did, and I can provide that Cora to you, the results. It showed the meeting minutes with Park and CDE that CDE was transmitting to them personally identifiable information. And they were supposed to get aggregated information or information about student 1 or student 2 or student 3, not Rochelle McKim or Christine Zips. It was personally identifiable information. And I realized that longitudinal database system, that LDS that people talked about, it's true. And I don't know what they'd be using it for other than marketing purposes, being able to gear advertisements to influence people. Politically, that's very valuable information as they grow older, but I appreciate the information because I know it's not just me being overprotective. It's really happening and it's harmful.
The park tests. Now there was 2, right? This is the Common Core testing when they went computerized, and there was park, and then there was another one. There was two sets. It was related to Race to the Top, right? And if it's not park, it's the other one. I think it's park. That was where they piloted modern adaptive learning courseware. So the actual, and I go deep into it in my book, but it comes out of this Skinner box technology. So it's operant conditioning. It's basically what B.F. Skinner made out of his teaching machines. But, when you mentioned, the whole idea of behavioral advertising, if you look at some of the modern adaptive learning courseware, so like Dreambox is one of them. And there's Smart Sparrow, Clever, Newton, things like that. But some of them explicitly tie the technology historically back to the Skinner box, but they also say that the algorithms that they use are basically identical to the behavioral advertising algorithms they use for Netflix and things like that. So it's literally the same type of data mining, right? It's just one is, I guess, given to you through an educational platform, the other one's given to you through a commercial platform.
Wow, and again, I think a lot of parents aren't aware that this is happening. I hosted an event over 5 years ago about screen time and what parents should know. And one of our speakers on the panel talked specifically, she was also a mother, but she did talk about data mining and just how they go about getting this information, how they sell it to third-party investors, et cetera.
They collect all this data, yet our U.S. Department of Education has had multiple data breaches and received an F on their security score because they can't keep the data secure. Yet it's mandatory that our children's data be uploaded. We can't opt out of it.